Today's episode is a good one. Today we have Dru Ledbetter, who is a C-suite executive at Xpress and also at Building a Life Legacy, which is the founding organization that's created ThePot Boston, a legal dispensary in Mattapan, Boston. And so we talk about so many incredible elements with regard to stepping into what is a booming industry, but a booming industry with a lot of asterisks and a lot of past taboos and societal shifts and changes around our messaging and beliefs around medicinal marijuana, recreational marijuana, cannabis, and the cannabis industry in general. So Dru is an experienced clinician. She was a former nurse. And so we bring so much of that healthcare background into our conversation here today, because I do think it's so important for us to understand and redefine our understanding around marijuana, around the cannabis industry, around pot and weed, whatever words that you grew up hearing about drugs and marijuana. And if you grew up in the 90s, you're an 80s baby and you heard the Say No to Drugs or the War on Drugs, or you were a part of the DARE, Drug Awareness Resistance Education program at your school. So much of what we talk about here, I will assume for you, is going to be so eye-opening, because for me, it has been a really interesting juxtaposition of understanding what I grew up believing and being fed about about marijuana in particular as that gateway drug, as that big slippery slope. If you do it once, your life is over. And the reality of right now, there are so many pockets of our American economy, but also the Canadian economy, that are booming based on cannabis sales, companies, investments, and the like. And so how do those two things come together? And then let's also add the historical trauma around marijuana and that war on drugs that I mentioned before that has disproportionately incarcerated Black and brown men. And it is something that if you have seen the movie 13th, if you haven't seen it yet, it's on Netflix, 90 minutes, it's well worth a watch. There is a conversation about incarceration and also incarceration on low-level offenses that are even more important now, because these conversations about things that were low-level offenses then are now being profitable opportunities and incentives for business partners, business opportunities for folks. And oftentimes those are white men in Silicon Valley or on Wall Street that are getting a chance to optimize those. So it's really interesting, the juxtaposition of how a new booming industry is coming in and the potential for stepping into legacy building opportunities, but also how that rubs so significantly against people that are imprisoned right now for the same sale, exchange, consumption of the same substance, the same plant. And yet we haven't healed that trauma. We haven't rectified that issue while we're also creating a new, marketing campaign identity with our relationship with cannabis. And so in this particular episode, we dive into so many elements of this. I hope that you are listening to this because you are curious one way or another. You are an advocate for this industry. You are critical of this industry, wherever you are on that spectrum. I would love to hear what you think about this episode, because I truly think that it's important for us to create a space for conversation, especially around things that seem to have done a complete and utter 180 without any of the education and training and message building to understand how and why we got from where we were in the 90s on the Say No to Drugs to where we are right now, where there are celebrities just touting their cannabis brands. There are huge VC companies investing in this stuff. And how and why is that happening? Also, how and why do we have founders that do not look like the demographics that were being incarcerated leading the charge here? How do we have this level of gatekeeping, these barriers, these rules and regulations that are keeping people who have been historically excluded, even more so excluded from an industry where they have been impacted in such a disproportionate way? I could go on. We go on in this episode. I am so excited for you to hear all about ThePot Boston, one of the incredibly community-centric offerings from Dru and her co-founders organization. And just, I would love to hear how this resonates with you, because I do feel like it's such a beautiful illustration of how during the pandemic in particular, we've had to evolve and shift and change as there are new developments and innovations coming to the forefront. I'm excited for you to listen to this episode, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us, NikkiInnocent.com/podcast, and let us know what you thought. Dru, welcome to Checkbox Other. I am so happy that you are here. I'm so happy to see your face, first of all. But I am just, it feels like it's been so long since I've actually gotten to connect with you. in the world right now. I mean, we're coming up on year 3 is about to start with COVID, pandemic, isolation, and just living in this like dystopian in between. And so I'm just so excited to be able to spend some time with you today and hear all about your amazing story.
Thank you. I'm
Okay.
excited to be here.
So here's the first thing. And this is like my favorite part because I can read all the bios in the world. I can go and like look it up online, but I love to give the microphone and hear kind of your take on your story, the twists and the turns and the aha moments. And the most important part of this is like, what about your life has led you to where you are today?
Absolutely. So I actually was born in Caracas, Venezuela, in South America, to Haitian immigrant parents, which is unique in itself, right?
Yeah.
And then my parents moved to the United States to build a better life, to build the American dream. And in 1990, we came up with them. So again, I come in as an immigrant child. I'm obviously a Black woman. I would have cornrow braids, and I was in bilingual Spanish class where no one else looked like me. And I was like, oh my gosh. So that was a transition in itself, trying to figure out the dynamics of being brown in America, because being brown in Venezuela was a completely different story. It was more about class, less about color. And then, of course, I was raised in Boston, and I went to Boston Latin School, and I went to Boston College, and I became a nurse. And the good nurse became a nurse at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. So I was like, oh, Boston, this is great. And I had a leadership bug. I had a leadership bug in high school. I had a leadership bug in college. And I went into clinical leadership pretty quickly in my career. So I was 26 and I was a nurse manager out of nowhere, where most of the nurses were my mother's age and would call me the kid when I would walk into work. So it was like, okay, well, let's call her the manager, not the kid. Um, then I transitioned over to Georgia, looking for a better life. I had a child. I was married at the time, and we wanted to like purchase property that seemed really challenging up here in Boston. So we're like, oh, let's go to Georgia. I have some family there, friends there. And I went into like really high level leadership there. And again, that was a little different experience. And after 2 children and a divorce, I came back to Boston because Boston is where the heart is. It's where my family is. It worked out really nicely. I'm like literally down the street from my mom's house, so it's a blessing. But most importantly, it allowed me to reconnect with a lot of people that I had been hiding from, because in my marriage things were very abusive, and I was ashamed of that life, and I didn't connect with my friends, and I didn't connect with certain people. So I came back, and I literally, like, within months, I was like, let's have a reunion, right? And we had like a Latin school reunion, a BC reunion, a neighborhood reunion. And I was able to connect with a lot of my childhood friends from middle school, high school, some from college and their new lives. And it just became a new journey. And in that journey, I also had as I was transitioning back, I had a bout with postpartum depression with my second child. So through the postpartum, I started my relationship with cannabis. I was in therapy, and I would walk into therapy every day, and and I would just cry for like an hour. My therapist was like, "Okay, see you next week."
Yeah.
And one time he said, "Have you ever considered cannabis oil? Because in Georgia, it's only medical, right?" And I was like, no, maybe I haven't. I'm in my 30s. Should I start consuming now? Like, this is a little weird, right? I'm like, I should have been smoking a long time ago. But then with that, I started my medical relationship with cannabis, and I was able to sleep because of cannabis. I was able to get through my depression because of cannabis. I was able to function as an adult because of cannabis. So for me, the stigma had changed, and that was important for me. So with that being changed, I stopped judging people who were also, had a relationship with cannabis, because I grew up with a pastor mama. Okay. So weed was like drugs and hard drugs, and we don't do that. Right. Awesome. So my mom's a pastor, and we don't do drugs. We don't smoke weed. That's not a thing. So really helping her understand my therapeutic relationship with it was important for me. And also connecting with other people that had therapeutic relationships with it. The story goes on to, like, of course, my former mother-in-law, passing away from breast cancer. And during her last days, cannabis use helped her with the side effects from chemo. Really just learning all these stories about people who have benefited from the use of the plant really helped me connect as a clinician, but also it made me curious and intrigued. And I started YouTubing about the plant and what can the plant really do.
Yeah.
And then my business partner and I were one of the group of friends that reconnected. And, we were like, we want to build a legacy for our kids. We're both parents. We want to make sure that we're moving things forward in this industry. And we felt like, hey, the green rush is coming. We missed the industrial revolution, right? We missed the roaring 20s after prohibition. This is a good place to start to begin to build a legacy for your family. This is a good business venture, and there's equity opportunities that give us a chance, right? And then so we decided, hey, let's go for it. So January 2021, in the middle of a pandemic, we built a company and we named it Build a Life Legacy, and decided that we were going to do just that. So we're doing business as ThePot, which is going to be a dispensary in the city of Boston, which is pretty awesome. And then Flower Express was our delivery business that has now grown into delivery, cultivation, and manufacturing out of Western Mass, which is amazing. I know, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I know. So I'm the COO of the dispensary in Boston and retail, and my business partner is the chief executive officer. His experiences in retail, he can manage that a lot better. I'm more in compliance and regulatory spaces. So we got a cultivation team, a manufacturing team, and I'm the CEO of the cultivation, manufacturing, and delivery business.
Oh, wow. Wow. I mean, there are so many elements of your journey that they feel like they all were like, oh, of course that would, in hindsight, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. But I can only imagine that if you go back to like, when you were talking about being that kid in class, being like, I'm the only one that looks like me, where this is bilingual, this is all of that feeling of like, is this where I'm supposed to be? Am I allowed to be here? Do I belong here? It's so interesting how so much of your story has been this process of evolving into the spaces that you're in and really embracing the opportunities that show up there. You've already given a couple of these other moments, but I'd love to just kind of open it up of you sharing a time. And if there's more than one, I feel like you sprinkled a little bit in already, where you have felt other or different, and really how that has informed how you operate in business and life and parenting and anything that feels like it resonates right now.
No, well, I'll start with the first one. When I moved here in 1990, that was probably the hardest transition for me. Again, I had no idea I was Black. And that sounds really weird because it just sounds weird. I had no idea I was Black, and I didn't understand what it meant to be Black in America. So I think walking into the classroom with my cornrows and just saying, speaking fluent Spanish and not knowing a lick of English, it was very normal to me and in my family. Everyone looked the same, kind of, sort of. We had, the range, but everybody looked similar. And having Latino students say, why are you in this class? You're not Hispanic. And then having the Black kids going, why are you always speaking Spanish? You're not Latino. I had a lot of conflict being other, and had to find my own little corner where I could thrive. I had to find people that looked like me. I had to embrace other people. So I had to learn how to be a Black woman. I had to learn how to be a Black Afro-Latina as well. And that was something that was my first other experience, trying to figure out where I fit in exactly, just in the culture and in this country. I would always say, I'm not Black. And then I'd be like, oh, you are, because when you walk into a room, you learn as you grow older, they don't know the nuances, right? Yeah. You walk in and you are a Black woman. I have dreadlocks, okay? I have a whole head of dreadlocks. I walk into a room, I'm a Black woman. End of story. So I had to embrace that and learn the history behind it, and learn to wear that crown, because that's not something that was like innate in me, that I was like, oh, Black pride. I had to learn the story. I had to learn the history of what it meant to be Black in America. A lot of immigrant children come here and we don't understand the inequities. We don't understand the disproportionate impacted areas. We don't understand the crime. We don't understand why so many people are on public assistance, why so many men are in jail. We just have this idea that they did this to themselves. We don't know about redlining. We don't know about Black Wall Street. So I had to learn all of that to really embrace who I was becoming as a woman in this country. So that was one of the first moments where I was like, okay, this is something you have to embrace. I know I'm over here, but I have to figure out how to get other people to understand that I belong in this space. And I mean, even as a clinical leader too, I was just young. I was the youngest, like, again, everyone was my mother's age. I was the young one. I had all these innovative ideas, and they're like, we don't do that like that. We don't do that. Yeah. And you're like, no, but this is how it should be done.
No.
Yeah. And I would always bend the line and the rules. And that's kind of how I would make my stamp. I really just would walk into the space and say, this is how I want to interact with this space, and this is how I want to present in this space, and this is how I'm going to belong here, whether you think I belong or not.
There's, just so you know, there's like so many, oh my gosh, I want to talk to her for an hour about this and an hour about that and an hour about this. There is so much of your story and that kind of centering kind of other of, hey, I'm showing up in a new space, but my identity has been defined before I was even here. And it also doesn't resonate with my experience. I also love the, I look like everybody, but there was a range in my experience growing up of seeing all different kinds of people and that being more than okay. It's not that because you look differently than I do, we can't be around one another. And the kind of isolationist approach that we have here in America of, unfortunately, there's a survival mechanism that's been built out of a culture that has isolated and categorized and othered us in a whole bunch of ways based on what you can see from 50 feet away before you ever get to talk to who that person is. And also it is this kind of overarching cloak of oppression that we have across so many systems and structures here that we don't talk about. So then as you're talking about that education that you had to kind of go seek, it wasn't part of the education process when you were going to school. It wasn't part of the conversation of what it is to be an American and to step into the shoes of being an American. Those weren't the stories that were told. But to actively educate yourself in kind of there's definitely something missing from what I'm learning here for this to be the way that it is, was I feel like such an eye-opening thing for a kid in the 90s, but even more so right now. The fact that okay, that was 30 years ago, and still we are having this kind of battle around information, but also battle around what is factual history, around how we understand our place in this world. And that there is a whole lot of identity definition being done outside of our own interaction with others and our own interaction with ourselves. I resonate so very much with that feeling of not knowing you were Black. It's funny because even at the beginning of the pandemic and for sure, the summer of, the uprising around racial injustice in our society that has been here forever, it was really interesting because I got to finally have some conversations with my father who immigrated from Haiti. And it was interesting because it wasn't just me and him. It was in a group of people. We were in a racial justice ministry at church. And it was so interesting to hear his perspective of his Blackness in America, because he too came here and was like, what are you talking about? Yeah, okay, this is what I've always looked like. This is what people around me look like. He came here when he was 15. And that experience of having to be rudely awakened to what it meant to be Black in America, to be a Black man in America for sure. And then also to still 50 years later, be experiencing real time the progression of that understanding with hopefully a larger awareness around you. So whether you've actually done the effort of let me create my own library of history that nobody's giving me, or it is through lived experience of being like, wait, this isn't, how did that happen? How did we end up in a place that doesn't feel right? How do we end up in a place where I'm supposed to identify with something that I'm not even familiar with yet? And I have to teach myself, as the child have to teach myself. I feel like so many adults are worried about that. I'm the child that doesn't know feeling, but I'm also an adult that should be teaching other children. How do I hold the space of not knowing while also being that role model that I'm supposed to step into the shoes of? And so I just love so much how you talk about not only your kind of self-education very intentionally, but also the spaces that you've been in. I think of the kid, right? The kid in nursing management, where you're like, yeah, I hear you. I understand what you're saying the rules are, but let me show you this way how it might be a little bit. Let's just give it a shot. Just watch. I promise it'll be better.
Exactly.
And learning how to kind of operate within the bounds of what is really difficult when people can only see in a very narrow lane that they've been presented with. And I'm very hopeful. I mean, part of me is like, that narrow lane, the walls are just getting blown up day by day. Like, we're having to broaden our perspective. Yeah. But there is so much, and even the work that you're doing and the legacy that you're building through Ball, and then also through very specific initiatives of ThePot. Here's all you don't have to understand all of it. All you got to do is show up here. You don't have to understand all the intricacies and the history and the background, but this is accessible and actually helpful for you. And you're not alone in considering it. I think is so powerful. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about how the kind of history of the cannabis experience. And I'm thinking of you're saying my mom was a pastor, and no, we don't do that. I mean, I am a kid that had proudly touted my DARE award at school. The drug awareness resistance education was so oh, we don't do that here. We don't talk about that. Drugs are bad. And anything that person on TV tells me is a drug is bad. I was also, caffeine is bad and sugar is bad. So, everything is bad. But the fact that we have this very skewed understanding of marijuana, cannabis, pot, whatever language tends to just bucket into the same thing, even though they mean different things oftentimes. How has the history of how we were taught in the say no to drugs 80s and 90s evolved into where we are today? And especially with the background in healthcare and nursing, how have you navigated that? I know, on a larger level, we have legislation that's making things more acceptable. However, we still have the underpinnings of the taboo. And we also have people that are definitely living the consequences of that kind of narrow view of the world and narrow view of how to operate within the world of cannabis. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that history has been shown up and how that is, how that's kind of come to fruition on a larger scale. I loved hearing your individual experience of it.
Absolutely. Well, I was also the dare kid. I won a poster contest in the 5th grade, and the tagline was, "If we work together, we can keep the world away from drugs." Right?
Nice.
I was proud with my little polka dot dress on the news, and I was on the Globe, and my mom still has the article, right? And now I'm growing a plant in my living room. So
Right.
it's like, sorry, mom, we missed that mark. But essentially, the war on drugs was a campaign. It was legitimately a campaign. Hemp had been grown in the United States for years before the war on drug had begun. Presidents grew hemp at the White House. They did. People don't know these things. But it was essentially an opportunity for them to categorize marijuana as ethically objectionable. So good people don't do drugs, right? These drugs.
Yep.
And these drugs are easily accessible in communities of color because they're easy to grow, they're easy to consume, people are smoking them, it's thumbs up. And they also labeled it as a gateway drug. There's been no evidence that marijuana has a gateway effect at all. There's been 0 overdoses or deaths related to marijuana. Nobody has died because they consumed too much marijuana. Not one person. So to me, the war on drug was a campaign that we're still trying to dismantle today. And it's in everything you do. Even our business plan and how we structured our business is all about destigmatizing the plant and really making it a medicinal approach. All the states, they did some research recently. There's all these reports, right? And one of the things that made me feel like we need to really shift the stigma and the focus is when you hear that all the legal states had a 25% drop in opioid deaths, right? So the gateway drug is causing 25% less people than in states that it's not legal and easily accessible, right? And this is something that is it's out there and it's information. People do not seek out information. There's a lot of misinformation. We just went through the era of misinformation and fake news and all the nonsense. So people putting out information about weed that's not true, people that do not, there's a lot of shame associated with weed. So for a long time, I would never say I consumed. I was like, I use it medicinally, but I'm not going to tell people that I use. If they find out, they find out. Yeah. Now I'm very open and clear that this helped me sleep when I had postpartum. This helped reduce my anxiety when I was trying to learn how to be a single mother. This helped me deal with the anxiety and the grief from losing my brother 2 years ago. This is a medicine that if you use it appropriately, microdose or in full dose, depending on if you learn about it and use it appropriately, if you consume it as a tincture, as a candy, as a tea, okay, as a bath bomb, as a topical analgesic, you can use it and it can help you. And I think people are not thinking about that. So a lot of our approach is being very boutique and focused on wellness and clean cannabis and craft cannabis, and essentially as organic as we can get. You can't label cannabis organic just yet, but we want to be as organic as possible so that medical grade cannabis is a thing. I want to be part of that movement. I'm a nurse, so I want to be part of the movement that moves cannabis into the life sciences space. We are traditionally left out of research, right? Black folks don't volunteer to show up to do research for no meds. They're like, I've been a nurse for a long time. I've begged people to take part in research projects, even the vaccine research. the mistrust around it is because a lot of us didn't get tested but we don't show up for these opportunities, right? This is one of the first and probably only times that you're going to see Black people come out in droves for cannabis research. And it's going to be our responsibility to be a part of that, to be a part of the production of this medicine, to share, to be a part of the communication, to be a part of the social justice pieces that are part of this as well. I think a lot of people forget that there's people in jail for weed right now. There is somebody who we're trying to get, there's a group called the Last Prisoners Project that I'm engaged with, and they're trying to get this young man out. He's been in jail 23 years for weed, and there's millions of dollars being made from the sale of marijuana. Yeah. No one should be in jail for weed, not one person. But the history is it was a drug, and this is the drug that caused, a lot of harm in our communities, and even in our own communities. My mama being a pastor, and our dispensary coming to Mattapan. Mattapan is 70% minority. They have the highest home ownership in the city. There are a lot of my mommies, aunties, and uncles, grandmas. My business partner's grandma lived across the street from our location. Like these are our elders.
Yeah.
And our elders are saying, don't do this. Don't bring this to our community, because they don't understand. And I think that it's our responsibility to make sure that we're part of the education and reducing the stigma. And that's a very important piece for me as a person, just being a clinician. I remember bringing my mom a topical cannabis cream, and I was like, just put it on your arthritis. And she's like, what was that? It helped. And I'm like, the plant, I'm like, oh, it was cannabis. And she's like, what? Did you give me drugs? And I'm like, no, Ma, it's topical. Like it helps. And I think that that's just, even showing her the plant was like, Ma, it's a plant. And yeah. I mean, you probably understand this better than most. In our Haitian culture, there's so much healing that happens through plants. Yeah. And that is something that was ingrained in me when I was a kid. If you got sick, there were leaves that came out of a bag, and my mom boiled them up and here, drink this will heal you. After I had babies, there are leaves that get boiled up in a pot and they bathe you with them. So why are we afraid of this leaf? Yeah. And I think that was my argument with my mom. And I honestly, I love having conversations with clergy, because healing is important. And I think that telling your parishioners that consuming cannabis is bad is not good for their healing. If they need it you don't tell them don't take your insulin. Right. You don't take so it's like, why would you tell them not to consume? And that's a sin against God. So I love having those conversations, but that was like way sideways. But again, the cannabis industry, no, seriously, it's not a gateway drug. And the history is that it was. Yeah. And now we have to change that. And it takes all of us to have conversations, and it takes all of us attaching a normal, educated, master's degree, professional woman says, I smoke weed. Then people are like, oh, wait, she smokes weed? Like, it's different. Right. It's very different when I say I do it.
Yeah. It's it's funny. The marketer in me is like, this is all just about really great messaging that was extremely detrimental to a very large swath of people, that then on the news and the way that the message was told in the character that was portrayed around marijuana was very, very stigmatizing, that had nothing to do with the marijuana itself. But that marketing campaign was powerful. The Say No to Drugs campaign, yes. And also the underpinnings, the kind of sub bullets to the point you're trying to make about the fact that this is really dangerous, and like, it's a slippery slope. And so be careful. Anybody comes anywhere near that, don't be around anybody like that, because you never know. Like, just the idea of it being across the street, careful. It isn't. And it's funny, because it's not that there wasn't an impact from that messaging. There wasn't a consequence from the belief around marijuana. It's that the outcomes weren't related to marijuana itself. It was that marijuana was used as an excuse to do really, really detrimental things, really inhumane, dehumanizing things to people in the name of a drug that actually, if you actually had the facts and figures, which again, that was pre everybody having the internet at their fingertips and in their back pocket, we have to take the word of the voices that have the microphone. And oftentimes that is putting us in a detrimental position to understand who we are, what we need, and what is actually helpful for us. The part that I feel like you and I both know, and we gave each other a little head nod as you're talking about this, about kind of participation, especially Black people participating in vaccines and medical research, that isn't because of anything other than historical oppression and dehumanization and harm. And if you don't know about the background of the use and abuse of Black bodies in order to be leveraging medical data, I really encourage you to go and take a look at. There's so many different, the Tuskegee experiment, there's the Henrietta Lacks, there's like so much that is attributing to that. So I just want to add that layer here, because I do think there is so much. Absolutely. As we try to have conversations about things, there is this historical, this like kind of like we were saying about the nurses saying we just don't do that this way. It's like there's a reason that these beliefs have been passed down, because there were systemic harmful things that happened. And so when the elders are saying don't go near that, it isn't because I'm afraid of it because of its scary plant. I've actually watched the consequences of systems of oppression leveraging these things to harm people that look like you and me. And so Absolutely. I do think it's so powerful, the work that you're doing of not only demystifying and creating a space for the conversation. And I would love for you to disagree with me. I would love for us to have a conversation about this. So it's not us versus one another, but really us uncovering stuff that has been either, again, the misinformation, or it's just been covered up by a whole bunch of other crap so that you think that it doesn't exist. And so one of the pieces I know of the pot is creating that educational experience and that training experience and that place to come with what might feel like a stupid question, or be the only person in your network that is interested in this. And you're more than welcome to become part of this. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you envision. So yes, at the pot, and then yes for Flower Express. And then my brain is, and then the next part of this legacy building, how much has education really been a cornerstone of how not only are you bringing the people into your community, but in advocating out in the community about just say, yes, please, it just allow us to show you rather than shutting the door before we even get a chance to talk.
So I think that has to be a layered approach. You first want to bring people in with the, call it the lowest hanging fruit. There's no threat in agreeing in social justice efforts, right? So we put that up front. That was one of the anchors and the pillars in our company. We need to be forward in social justice efforts. We need to be forward in community education and empowerment. So not only creating opportunities to partner with nonprofits that are doing expungement clinics and attorneys that are doing expungement clinics, but also create job opportunities in an industry that is new for people in our community, and educating them and empowering them to apply for these jobs. And part of our training process is definitely going to be, we've tapped into a cannabis specialist. You have specialists for everything, and now they have cannabis specialists. And we have one, Ariel Clark, who is an herbalist as well. And she's working with us on the education component for our own employees to really empower them to teach our consumers that come into the store. I think the other component is really creating online programming, which is something that's part of our positive impact plan, to really share our knowledge, like Cannabis 101. This is the plant, this is the root, this is what it works for. I'm affiliated with Minorities for Medical Marijuana and ACAM, which are both science, medical-led, Black-owned nonprofits that are working to educate everybody from the root to the leaf. How do you consume it? How do you extract it? How do you grow it? How do you use this as medicine? And it's all medical professionals in a lot of these spaces. And we're having these conversations because it's important for our community to benefit from the plant as medicine. We have been putting in a lot of toxins into our bodies for years and years. And there are things that can be cured and alleviated with the plant that are not going to have a negative impact on you long term. And we're missing out. And we're missing out because of the stigma. And I think that that's so important for us. In our company in particular, we definitely partnered with Big Hope Project, which is a big expungement nonprofit. It's Black owned. It's out of Boston as well. And also Let's Talk Weed, which is an educational series run by Darrell Black in Boston as well. And they're basically putting together events that are helping educate the community. And we had a powerful event about women in cannabis this weekend on Friday. And a girl stood up and was like, how do we get in? And she was in tears. Yeah. And it touched all of us, because it's like, we see everybody winning, and then we don't even know our own worth and value in this industry. And it's because we don't have places to gather and network and fellowship to have these conversations. We're not used to having conversations about business, about profitability, about ROI, about what municipalities should we partner with we're not used to that. We're always in competition. And it's so important in this early stages of the Massachusetts cannabis industry that we don't look at each other as competition and we really become allies, because that's the only way we're going to survive. There's only about 14.1% minority owned businesses. It's 71% white in Massachusetts. And there's about 11% women owned. And if you mix women and minority, it's only 1.2. So there's like 5 of us and we all know each other, which is kind of crazy. And this industry it generated 188 million to date since January 1st. It's what, February 28th? It's generated 188 million in revenue. And there's only 1.2% of people that look like me in this industry leading the charge. We need to just collaborate and work together. And I think that that's going to be important. And we need to educate our people. And I think that that's important. People think that, hey, I have a drug charge, I can't start a business. No, you can. And we can expunge that drug charge. Let's work on it. So I think partnering with the community in that way is truly important to us. We really built our business plan by talking to the community first. I think that we're probably one of the few that did that. We built the company in January and then started talking to community groups. We didn't have a location. We didn't know what we were going to do yet. But we said, if we wanted to build a dispensary in our community, the one we grew up in, what do the people that live here want it to look like? And people talked about they don't have high-end experiences in Mattapan. And that's like, okay, well, I'm going to bring a high-end experience. We don't have pop-up places or educational places for people to gather. We don't have like places that you feel safe and secure, that there's no. So we really took a lot of that and said, and then what do you need? Because the tax money goes to the city, right? And the city distributes it as it wishes. Yep. What does Mattapan need from us? How do we serve our community outside of the money that's going to the state? Because this is a profitable business and we want to make sure we share the wealth with our community. So really creating employee programs and having prioritization in our community and saying, you know what? Big companies give out bonuses, small businesses will too, and we will, and we're going to pay a higher than minimum wage rate because we want you to have a living wage, and we're going to have incentive bonuses, and we're going to have volunteer programs and PTO, and we're going to make this a good employment experience, and we're going to draw people in the community, because the minute you start to impact the economics of a community, you impact the community as a whole. And I think that the more people that are affiliated with ThePot in Mattapan, or the more people that are affiliated with Flower Express in Western Mass, they're going to realize that there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to give. And I think that that's the most important part of all this.
So I'm covered in chills right now. There's so much power, and I feel like there are so many lanes. So even as I'm hearing this, I'm like, if somebody wants to come and try to poke a hole, there are so many places that this is a good business plan, right? Not only a good business plan, but a good humanity-centric, strengths building, creating better futures for all of us kind of plan. And then the part I will say, one of the things that's been hard for me is I want to talk about this. I've wanted to talk about cannabis for sure for a while, and also so many of the faces and the voices were white, and they were white male voices, and they were not the faces or the voices that have been historically incarcerated and punished for this industry that has all of a sudden become an acceptable, profitable place to be investing your time, your energy, and your interests and passions. And so it's really something that has always rubbed me. I remember when in Colorado, was Colorado the first state when everything kind of was like, oh,
Cali.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was Cali, definitely.
Okay. Cali, Colorado, that whole area of like, yeah, this is cool. And it kind of gave this like Silicon Valley kind of boom to it of, okay, let me get on this now. And it felt like, wait a second, this industry has been here for a very long time and also has been set up in a very negative light. People have experience with this. People have past trauma around this. How are we just all of a sudden acting like we're flipping a switch and all that didn't exist? And so I think creating this experience of education, of community outreach as the underpinnings of how and why we do what we do is so powerful, but also the generative legacy building piece of this and the representation of it. I feel that woman that stood up and raised her hand and said, how do I join this? Because it's something that you want to be able to, how do we redefine our relationship with something that actually isn't bad, but we've been told is bad this whole time? How do we realize that this boogeyman that we've been told about forever actually can be something that can help us? And so it is so powerful to hear, and also important to shine a light on the numbers, how those numbers are unfortunately so low, and also have such a possibility of increasing and being something where if we actually come together in collaboration, the whole idea of raising all tides can come here. So I'd love to hear, you're talking about expungements, nonprofits. I'd love to hear a little bit about how as you've been kind of navigating this space that has become very, or was very white bro centric, and historically has oppressed Black men, very much so, Black and brown men and women. How have you kind of navigated the space in the reality of, once this became acceptably profitable, the face of this conversation, the taboo of this conversation, so much of it changed, and to be able to hold space for the healing that needs to happen, as well as the kind of growth that has the potential to be creating those legacies that you guys are building?
So I will say to you that everything is still very white male led. You can have a Black owned company, but you need to raise capital, right?
Yeah.
So unless you have access to capital, you're going to end up knocking on a white man's door. Or maybe if you're lucky, you find minority venture capitalists that are willing to kind of cross over into cannabis. But there's a lot of federal laws and banking laws that prevent people in that space from tapping in. So unless you have a lot of capital just liquid, you don't really have an opportunity to cash out or cash in to the cannabis industry. So for me, I'll tell you one experience. We had an investor meeting for our cultivation site, and I walk in, I'm the CEO, great, right? And there's my cultivation lead is a Black man to my right, and then there is one of our community resources people in Western Mass is a white male to my left, and they're swiveling. No one is looking at me, and I'm like, okay, why are we talking to my subordinates and not me? I don't understand. Or why are we talking to the people who I brought to the table to help explain some of these components, but you're not talking to the person who wrote the business plan? It's sobering to, like, because you walk out and you're like, oh, and you want to like, so that's that experience as being a Black woman in this space. It's
You walk in, let me say to you, I can do this. I'm showing you,
yeah.
I'm showing you time and time again that I can do this. My voice is the one that's the authority in this room. Listen to me, please.
I just wasn't viewed as authority, and I built this team. Like, yeah. Dude,
yeah,
like they're here because I literally picked these people out. Like, don't do this to me.
Yeah.
But another thing for me is I always felt like the cannabis industry, once they decided that this was something we were going to pursue as a country, that we did it backwards, right? They saw the numbers coming in from Canada, and Canada's making millions of dollars, and they're funding all types of projects with that money. And they have tradable companies, and they're making, it's like booming in Canada. So the US is like, we want in, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing we should have done is like, well, let everybody who's been locked up for simply this, let them out. Yes. Let's do that part. Let's look at the damage that it's done, and the people who are in jail for nonviolent offenses, just cannabis possession or consumption, and open the door and let them out. And then say, hear ye, all you people, we're going to start a cannabis industry. And because you were impacted negatively, let's give you a head start. I know that there's this meme that went around about equity, equality, and fairness, or whatever it was. It was like the 3 stacks. Yeah. And essentially, we haven't even been given a fair shot. The people who don't have criminal offenses, like they had to build social equity programs for us to get a fair shot. Like they still had a head start. Like corporate America still had a head start on cannabis, and the communities and the people that were impacted by it have not even had an opportunity or a chance. And then it became the celebrity thing. So there's all these celebrities with pockets, and they're now the Black face of cannabis. So unless you're affiliated with them, you're not really in the game. So it's been commercialized and sensationalized. And I think that it's important for us as business owners in this space to continue to work with the legal system and advocate. And yeah, we're business owners and we're trying to create this profitable business, but I'm still very involved in what's going on with the legislature. What are we doing about these people who are locked up? What is the Cannabis Control Commission doing about all these equity applicants that are getting taken advantage of by predatory lending and predatory landlords? What are we doing as a municipality to ensure that people don't take advantage of us trying to enter in the industry? there's a few things that you need to enter into the industry in Massachusetts. And the first thing, which is the worst thing to have, is it's called location control. So you have to have a site. How many people in our communities own commercial property outright? How many? We have never been allowed to.
Yeah.
Half of Mattapan is not owned by anybody who lives in Mattapan. I will tell you that. We don't, so we already have a disadvantage walking into the industry based on the legislation. So this is when you get in front of the cannabis control commissioners, you get in front of the people making the decision and say, it's not working. And that's what I did Friday. We had a commissioner in-house for that event, and I pulled her aside and I was like, this ain't working. We've dropped, thousands of dollars of our own capital and then got derailed because somebody said, oh, it's cannabis. Let's jack up the rent to 4 times rent, and then give me a piece of your business. And then I also want, 20 cents on the dollar for every dollar you make. And that's how they talk to us, because we don't have the capacity to have location control without them.
Yeah.
So the first step of entering the cannabis industry already puts us in a disadvantage, which kind of sucks for everybody. So we think we need to buy back the block. And that has to be part of what we do as cannabis entrepreneurs is real estate and buying properties in your own community and owning properties in your own community. So when 10 years, 20 years from now, when other people are looking to get into this industry, I can be a good landlord to you. And I can say, welcome, come into this space. This is a good place to do it. Or I can have an incubator program within my own company that will train you how to get your own, because all of us can eat. And that's the one thing that there's so much out there.
Yes.
There's so much out there, but it's like everybody's so greedy and they don't want to bring others on. And for me, that's been my biggest struggle. Like, you meet folks in this industry and in this space, and no one wants to teach you, and no one wants to show you. No one wants to connect you.
Yeah.
And you know how we met. We met through a connection when I was doing my transformation coaching, and I was, writing my book, and those are the connections that help you grow and expand. And it's like we don't have that opportunity, and because there's a lot of the corporate white male led markets. They have all the power and the control. Sure. And they decide what's important, and you either become the token or you get left out. And I am trying my hardest not to be the token. I'm trying to create my own lane for my own people so that everybody can have some. That's what our goal is.
You're like, can I be the token that you put in the machine, and then all of a sudden the machine breaks and all the tokens fall out so we can all hang out? Because it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Exactly.
There is so much, so many pieces to this that were resonating so significantly. I think we went at this backwards. We have an opportunity to do things different, and still we follow the same playbook that we've created inequity on inequity over and over and over again through our history. We also follow the same playbook that doesn't allow us to heal trauma, that then creates not economic inequities, not just economic harm. It creates actual psychological harm. It creates communities where we are really struggling to make ourselves whole human beings, because we've had to kind of negotiate parts of ourselves away in order to get that landlord space for 80 cents on the dollar that I earned, that I'm also then having to pay out 60 cents on that to get this. And, so really I'm getting 2 cents at the end of the day, but I'm doing all the work. And just because you held the space, that we don't even know the history of how you got that space, but let's go all the way back to the founding air quotes of our country, where it was taken in a whole bunch of ways too. So it's like, if we don't actually allow ourselves to be informed by history, we just continue to replay and repeat the same cycles over and over again. And so the idea of healing and inviting people in and really understanding that we all can eat, that was exactly those words. Like, I'm like, yes, like so much of that is the women's leadership coaching that I stepped into out of corporate, that I was like, this is my career therapy. One of the biggest pieces of that was around it's not a zero-sum game. We had this understanding in our country that we have to be extractive, we have to be hierarchical, and we have to really get it while the getting's good, because it's not going to be there for us. We have to get our piece of the pie, or we have to I always think about it like pizza day. It's like, make sure you get your slice before it's all gone, and watch that guy take 5 slices. How did he feel okay taking 5 slices? That the reality isn't that, but we've been conditioned and marinating in that soup for so long that the idea of being like, actually, if we do this together, we can get much further. And, you know, we get our taglines, we get our presidential campaigns that say those things, but when we use kind of the word stronger together, but then in behavior and in action, it's repeating the same things. It's very confusing and discombobulating. And so creating a space to actually model that is such a beautiful thing. And maybe it doesn't go as fast and as far within the first year as that celebrity endorsement or as that tech bro Silicon Valley funded space will, but it also creates such legacy building transformation, generational change and generational healing, which, I mean, I am hopeful, I will cross all the fingers, toes, eyes, whatever we can do here, that we start to actually do the work to learn, because we will come up against all those hurdles that have been wonderfully, meticulously put in place. That rule of having to have a spot is not, it's not just, oh, that's, you know, that's the way it always has to be. It's put there for a reason. And how do we create, like, I'm thinking about you as the kid manager being like, yeah, that's the rule. It actually doesn't work for everybody. Can we figure out how to operate so we actually give people the healing, the help that they need in the medical setting? Can we create a way for this? I understand the sentiments and what you're looking for. You want this to be grounded in some sort of fact-based element of us bringing this to fruition, but it doesn't mean that I have to give so much of what I'm doing away before I even get a chance to actually have it live and breathe air in everyday life. So I think there's so much power in just the community-based, like, again, it's not the way that we're taught to build business in school. At least I went to school. It was not about like, when you have an idea, go watch the community and work with them on how to build it. It was have your idea, license your idea, figure out your business plan. How is it going to be profitable? Have your revenue numbers 5 to 10 years out, have all of these ideas and have them mirror to the business principles that have been happening over and over and over from the guys that have graduated from here and who have, you know, are part of this alumni network and who are funding all of these other startups this same way. That is kind of like, get on this one track of success and stay there, instead of saying, actually, is that success? Does that work? Yeah. Does it put money in people's pockets? For sure. Does it put money in pockets where it just gets lost in the barrels of money that are already there? What happens if we actually focus on, instead of transactional, transformative? And can that also put money in pockets, but put money in the pockets that are actually going to benefit from that money in a way that it's not going to get lost and it's not going to get reused to perpetuate stuff that's just separating us even more? And so there's so much. I mentioned to you before we hopped on, I went and watched one of the council committee meetings. And I was just it was really fascinating to me because I'm not familiar with kind of this kind of legislative setup. And so watching and witnessing, I've seen business pitch, business plan competitions, that kind of stuff for sure. But watching how it is just people, and it is people standing up and saying, here's what I'm going to do, here's my plan. And having the advocates that step up in the room. I'm just here to say that I know this person and I know the great work they're doing. I'm just here to say I know this is really helpful. I'm just here to say that this is going to be extremely helpful in expanding the economics of our hometown. Even the questions that were asked in that meeting around, like, okay, can you talk to me about how this in reality is going to bring all these jobs, and having that boots on the ground of like, yes, we're going to build this, but also here are it's going to be me, but the ripple effect is immediate. And so being able to show that and watch that and witness that in a place where oftentimes, if it happens behind closed doors until somebody else brings the media in with a very different face on it. So I'm just like, there was so much of, thank you, one, for being that education for me, but I'm just so excited for how much space you're creating and what you're doing for that kind of modeling to show up, and those 5 of you that are stepping into this space in Massachusetts to just become 50, hopefully very soon. And kind of how can we get rid of those hurdles? So I'd love to hear the coach, the coach in us. Yeah. I'd love to hear how the coaching element for you has transformed the way that you've approached building a team. I feel like there's a little bit of coaching technique in how you're talking to people in positions of power, of really helping them see what might not already be there. So I'd love to hear how kind of that experience in your life has informed this endeavor now.
Well, the coach in me, of course, I created the rapid change process, which is that 5-step process, RAPID, recognize, acknowledge, process, ignite your own fire, and then decide what's next. And for me, the decision is always just the ongoing behaviors, right? So we really just had to recognize, okay, this is an opportunity, right? And we acknowledged it. And then the processing part started to happening. So as a coach, we really were like, what do we need? And I'm also a project manager in the tech space and healthcare. So the last 6 years I spent as a project manager in healthcare IT. So I was like, we know what needs to happen one step before the other, but you can't get anything done until you have a team. So then I started putting out feelers and I was like, okay, I need this. And this is important to us in building this business. We want it to be, tech. We want to have a lot of tech. We want it to be a lot of, no touching automated systems so that we can focus on the people and focus on our consumers, right? And so we're like, okay, let's find a director of tech, and within my own network found one. And then just having people who are, I think I'll say this before I continue. One of the conversations I never used to have with my friends is, what do you do? I never asked any of my friends what they did for a living because it doesn't matter to me. We're friends, right? But in learning what my friends did for a living, I learned to appreciate them as women in power, men in power. Like my brother is our CFO, and I have never looked at him as anything but my little brother. And now he's like a force to be reckoned with. Like that's, I rely on him very heavily for our numbers, and he's brilliant. Yeah. And I knew he was brilliant. I mean, he has an MBA. He's also my brother, so he better be. Yeah. But I didn't understand who he was as a person. So I think learning people, and then as you're building the team, remembering the humanity in these people. Our team is made of humans. Some of us, have LGBTQI issues going on at home. Some of us have health issues going on at home. All of us are mothers. Some of us are divorced. Some of us are married. Everybody's a parent. So we had to be really creative in recognizing what was important to that person and what was the important piece of this journey, and aligning their position with whatever they wanted to do. So it really took me having a lot of clarifying conversations about, where do you want to go next, and how do you want to do this, and how do you envision your life, and what do you recognize about yourself, and then what are you committed to doing daily to get to where you need to go and where you need to be. And that was, I built a team as a coach, as a life coach, is like, and it was good to have, because I'm very emotional. It was good to have a very practical business partner that said, okay, we need this, and this is important, and this is also something that we need to make sure we have on our team and in our wheelhouse. So together we were able to tap into resources right around us and say, hey, we're all from this neighborhood and we all have these amazing skills. Let's do this together. And as a leader in business, our team looks to us not only as the leaders in business to inform them of what we're doing and making decisions and kind of guiding the process, but we're all friends. And we spend time together, and we see each other, and we know when we're in the boardroom and we know when we're not in the boardroom, so that we give each other the space to be human. Yeah. And in my journey to self-love and that radical self-love, the biggest piece of that was acceptance. So learning to accept people as they are and for who they are, and then embracing their strengths, and then helping them see their own strengths is something that I did as a coach. And it was beautiful to be able to put a team together where, I know what my friends' issues are. I know what my siblings' issues are. I know what my business partners' issues are, but their strengths is what really comes to the table every week when we meet. Like that piece of them is, how do you pull that out of them, and how do you help them see it in themselves so that they can stay motivated if I fall off, because I'm also human. Yeah. So when I'm not motivated, can you motivate me? And that's kind of the energy that we've created within our team, so that if anybody's ever really feeling out of the loop, we all have an accountability partner per se, because that's how we were built. And that's the energy and the family we kind of built. We didn't say, hey, let's build a team of partners. We're a family, and it feels like a family, and it feels like we can rely on each other in that way. So it's kind of nice. It was beautiful to be able to do that, and see the process, and see the transformation in each person as they stepped up to the plate, as things get a little tougher, and as we face rejection, or we just had a big blow to our Boston site, and we had to switch and make some changes. But seeing everybody really pull in and rely on what they know about themselves and what they've learned about themselves, it was really beautiful. And now we're just back at it, and it's dope.
It's so funny. It's like you were reading my mind, because one of the things that I kept feeling as you were talking about that wonderful way of actually building what I think is a sustainable business model that is focusing on the fact that humans are going to be humans, and we have strengths and weaknesses that can be the underpinning when there is stress, that we can support one another, because there's always going to be these ups and these downs, is that whole mentality of, business as a family. And there's a lot of stuff that I've been seeing out in the kind of, I don't even know if I'd call it coaching space, but in the leadership conversation space about how dangerous it can be to call your business a family. And it didn't resonate with me, because I do think that if you're dedicating, it pretty much was like, well, there's a whole lot of history around, okay, but if your family is built on metrics that we have in our society that are making people feel less than, then yes, please don't model that kind of family dynamic. But the idea that we can interact with each other, knowing that we are whole people outside of this space, that we understand that we are able to have different roles within this entire family of a company, that is important. And that we give and we take and we show up when other people aren't able to show up as fully, we can step up and step into those spaces and cover for one another and care about one another. And it's really interesting because when I read that about it's dangerous to kind of talk about that family dynamic, the first thing that came to me is, if the idea of family is something that makes you nervous, that's not about the business. That's about your kind of own individual journey of understanding how we respect one another, how we are in community with one another, how we uphold the collective as individuals. And if that relationship has been through patterns of really dysfunctional family elements, then yeah, that would be a very scary thing to be like, oh God, I'm stepping into where my family is at work too. But you have the opportunity. What I just heard from you towards the end of that was like, you have the ability to be building that family from the ground up. You have the very intentional steps you can be making to complement one another in your skill sets, in your interests, in your passions, and also in the energy levels you'll have throughout this experience. And so it's so interesting because one of the pieces I feel like with burnout in particular right now, and we talk about it with work, we talk about it with life, we talk about COVID, right? Just exhaustion from over inundation from the news. Everything is constantly in crisis. When you're in that, one of the huge parts of actually being able to survive that is connection and the ability to have support when you're feeling weak, and for somebody to be able to be that sturdying support when you need somewhere to lean. And if we create business situations where we are not human and connected in relationship with one another, that element, that natural way that we are as humans are meant to be connected with one another is broken before we even get a chance for it to work. And so I love so much hearing the built and chosen family that you've created, and even more so with your brother, biological and chosen, that is coming into fruition. And again, I think the part that I just keep thinking about, the ripple effect that you created in this, is by creating this space, you'd have no idea the ripple effects that are coming. And this is like such a repetitive theme. So for those of you that listened to the last episode, sorry, I know we talked about this too, but these ripple effects are so significant now. And so many of us as millennials are stepping into, elder millennials and younger Gen X are stepping into positions of leadership. And these ripple effects that we each individually have had to have by noticing things don't work are turning into waves that are actually shifting the tides. And so the ability for us to create these new spaces that really are pulling from the idea of collective human ability to come together and change things is really something that can change us moving forward, even if we don't have a near-term example of how it worked in our recent past. And so I just feel like there's a part of me that's wanting to make a testament to the fact that you and your team are creating ripple effects that it feels like a wave in its own way. And even as you're talking about the community of women and Black women in particular in Boston, creating this new frontier and welcoming people in, and for that woman to be able to feel comfortable standing and saying, I need help in understanding how I can be a part of this. How can my energy, light, skills, strengths be part of this? Can you help me? And saying, yeah, oh, of course, come in. Not like, oh, sorry, the elevator's full, closed door, but you're welcome to be here. There's so much power in that might not be the power that can say yes to that I get all the VCs saying yes to me. There is so much kind of what has been historically called grassroots, but the collective is so powerful. We're experiencing it with everybody leaving their jobs, right? It's not the bosses are telling you what to do. People are like, this isn't working, I gotta go. The power of the collective, the power of that grassroots piece has so much transformational change. And the points, I feel like we talked about so many like powerful, pivotal elements of our society right now that your business is hitting on is like, gives me so much, I'm like amped. I'm about to hop out of my chair right now. But I'm just so excited to bear witness to all that comes on the other side of it. And so for people that want to follow you, follow ThePot, follow Building a Legacy, a lifelong, in my brain, it's law.
Ball.
Ball, yeah,
Build a
sorry.
life legacy.
Build a life legacy. Nikki, come on, get your marketing shit right. How can they follow you? How can they get involved? How can they amplify? How can they become part of this wonderful community of people that is really trying to create a new frontier, a new transformative oriented, expansive move forward?
So I would say we're on Instagram and Facebook. Our Instagram is and Facebook is we're not as active as we could because we're actually building a business. But so it's at ThePot Boston for Instagram for ThePot, and at Flower Express is it underscore? I think it's underscore MA, right? And that is Flower Express with no E, so FLOWERXPRESS and underscore MA. That's on Instagram. I'm also on Instagram on as Dru Canna Queen. I used to be the Nomad Queen because I was always on the road. So I figure I'm going to be the Canna Queen now since I'm always at home.
Yeah.
And between Canna and Queen, there's an underscore as well. You can also find me at Mac Burnett. I'm still a life coach. I'm still an author. I still have a book on Amazon. I write under the pen name Mac Burnett, which is my grandmother's name. So you can find me at Mac Burnett on Instagram. And there's a lot of like life lessons, tidbits, quotes. I'm trying to marry all of my worlds together because I feel that there's a lot of my clients in coaching that could benefit from experimenting or exploring cannabis as a mental health additive in addition to the things that they're doing. And I feel like a lot of people want to create change and want to live more authentic lives. And part of being authentic is acknowledging that you're a consumer. There's so many, all my friends smoke, most of them smoke, but they won't say it out loud. And because we're all professional women and we're all in corporate America, and it's scary to say that out loud, and we're moms, we're going to be judged for consuming. And I've always said, weed made me a better mom. Like when I can step away and not get angry at my kids and be able to actually just relax and microdose and say, okay, I need to breathe and bring kindness to the forefront. Sometimes that's the break I need. Some people take that break and drown a bottle of wine and nobody's mad at them and nobody judges them. And then they fall asleep on their babies. I can be present and be with my children because I have an ability to step away and lower my own anxiety and deal with my own traumas and pains and triggers. And I think that that's so important. So yeah, I want to marry all those worlds together eventually. But right now, the entrepreneurial life is great. I'm also on LinkedIn as Dru Burnett. Am I as Dru Burnett? It's Dru Ledbetter, actually. And we have websites. ThePot has a website. So if you want to sign in and get messages from us, Flower Express Boston has a website as well. And ThePot Boston has a website. So you can find us online. You can find us on Instagram. I answer all messages. So if you're just curious about how to get in, or I'm managing all that. We're kind of like a really small team, and we hopefully will get big enough one day that somebody else can manage that for us. But right now you have access to us, and that's kind of beautiful in itself.
Yeah. Oh, well, and for those of you listening, all of these links will be on the show notes page. So if you were scribbling and you were nervous that you missed something, you're always welcome to rewind, but they will be in one place for you to click through. And I tell you right now, all of you, you need to be paying attention to this. Dru you are changing the game. I am like, your vision that you just mentioned, I feel like as we're talking about this, it all feels so, like I was saying about your journey, feeling like, I did this thing, all of it feels like it's exactly kismet. It's exactly meant to be where it was. And the idea that you're creating this space that is creating opportunities where people are saying, I need them, is just something that I feel like no marketing message can do for you. You are literally doing and creating and offering what people say that they need. And so for those of you that are interested in this, reach out to Dru. This is so important. And I can't tell you, like, honestly, I've wanted to talk to you about this for a very long time. So I'm so excited that you joined today for this, and keep me updated. I will obviously spread the word in any way I possibly can about the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's so good seeing your face too.
Yes.
I can't wait to learn in person again.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
We got to go have some Asian food.
Absolutely.
Tough sell. I know. Very tough sell. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Ooh, good episode. Told you, right? Dru hit the nail on the head on so many different things that we talked about today. Of course, we could have talked for even longer. I am so curious to hear what you thought. What element of this stood out? What things did you already know? What things did you have no idea? And do you have more questions? If you have questions for me, if you have questions for Dru, do not hesitate to reach out to us. Go to nikkiinnocent.com/podcast and let us know what you thought. If you want to learn more about this, we'd be definitely up for having more conversations. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will catch you on the next episode.